Here's what's coming up on today's show.
So we have to slow the game down, and we have to examine the things we don't see, because we can't go back to day one in their lives and start a brand new beginning, but we can change right now and help them create a brand new ending.
This is the Retire Happy podcast with John Amarino, fiduciary financial advisor at Securus Financial in the San Diego area, and Thomas O'Connell, president of International Financial Advisory Group, Inc. in Rockaway, New Jersey. Together, they'll be keeping retirement happy from coast to coast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Retire Happy podcast. I am your host on the West Coast, John Amarino, joined by my esteemed co-host on the East Coast, Tom O'Connell. Tommy, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, everybody. Hello, John. Hey, big congratulations to your son winning that Little League championship over the weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, since we last talked, he was a starting pitcher through the playoffs, and they won their Little League championship. And then they also took home the Poway City Championship on Friday. So appreciate it.
Yeah, nice stuff for Jake the Snake.
Yeah.
Brian Cashman is going to sign him soon.
Yeah, well, speaking of killing it, the Yankees sure are killing it these days. Boy, they look like a football team against the Cubs this last weekend.
Yeah, well, their day has been coming for a while, so it's about time.
You guys had your decades of dominance. Try being a Padre fan. So, folks, enough baseball. We have a great guest on today's show. We figured, you listen to us ramble on and rant and rave, Tommy and I, for 45 minutes on the last episode. So, on today's episode, we have a guest. We're always big on knowledge. And who else better to have on knowledge than to bring the CEO and founder of the Wealth and Wisdom Institute, Mr. Len Reiner. Len has been in the financial industry for over 35 years. He's served on the advisory committee at Wayne State University School of Business. He's spoke at the Federal Reserve of Chicago's Money Smart Week for 2 years. And he's actually received the board's highest honors for his talks. And his talks are focused on the economic trends and shifts and the impact of government programs and regulations on the social fabric of our country. And last but not least, he's authored 7 books and has been on the publisher's bestsellers list. So I know Tommy's excited, and I'm excited for today's guest, Mr. Len Reiner.
And today's guest, CEO and founder of Wealth and Wisdom Institute, it's Len Reiner.
Thank you, John. How you doing, Tom?
Hey, how are you, Len?
I'm doing fine. We're living in a very exciting time. Historically, it may be a little scary exciting, but it's an exciting time. There's a lot of changes going on.
Yeah, and where there's change, there's opportunity, right?
Absolutely. And we just have to recognize the opportunities, and that's what we want to make sure people understand totally what is going on behind the scenes when it comes to what's happening economically in our country and how it's going to impact them personally in their financial futures.
Yeah, and you mentioned what's going on economically. I mean, what a timely conversation, right? We're seeing the market slide back down. The market's been down all of 2022. I just passed a gas station here in San Diego. Gas at $6.99 for regular unleaded. Houses. Going for, houses here in San Diego, 1,800 square foot homes selling for $1.4 million. Very interesting. And, that's kind of where Tommy and I want to start today's conversation. And we want to talk specifically about your brand new book. Just came out, so I haven't had the chance to read it, but it's on my list. and it's called Double Jeopardy, Hiddenomics and the Role of the Government. And I got to tell you, Tommy and I were talking before the show, just reading the cover of this book, where you're talking straight to us, that the challenges that many Americans are facing are not actually financial product issues. They are complicated everyday issues. And I think everyone that's listening can agree that, look what we've been through the last couple of years, the pandemic, the political environment, increasing costs, double-digit inflation, and the government mandates. So I'm really excited to talk about why you wrote this book and why you think things aren't working out for today's American.
Well, I do a lot of research. I'm involved in economic circles for advisors of senators and congressmen, and they're interesting listening to these people, what they're about to do to us, not necessarily for us. And I think for the first time, many Americans are starting to realize they're not in control of the outcomes in their lives. They have a gut feeling that they're not prepared financially, and they realize that there's no financial certainty that they can rely on. In order to master the solutions in our financial lives, we must first master the challenges and understand them, and have a total awareness of how it's going to impact us. Because without understanding this, the solutions that are given to us by the traditional financial thinkers will be destroyed. I mean, you have to have a full impact of this. Hiddenomics is simply an ongoing examination of the challenges and the myths and realities that surround the financial services industry. We have to address the issues, and in many cases, these issues are going to impact people's lives dramatically. And if we don't have this awareness, this is all about awareness. If we don't have this awareness and information and knowledge, the ability to make financial decisions in the future fall into the category of guesswork. And so that was the purpose of the book. The book is not a solution-driven book. It's an awareness-driven book. And that way, your planner, people that you look at for your advice, if they don't have this information, I don't see how you can get the proper planning that you're looking for. And we have discussed this with a lot of people across the country, that there are 9 elements that will dramatically impact your planning results. And we list them under Hiddenomics because they're not on the illustrations the financial people give you. They're not on the charts or the graphs. These are 9 elements that are in the background, pulling the strings from where you'll end up in your financial future. And the first 5 are really sort of a litmus test for people when they're looking at what they're doing in their financial lives. The first 5 of the 9 elements are risk, taxes, regulation, inflation, and depreciation of the dollar. We tag these as the core elements in your life. And when we look at these elements, these are going to dramatically impact your financial future. Let me give you a quick example. Does a 401k, putting money into a 401k, solve the client's and the public's problems of risk, taxes, regulation, inflation, and depreciation? Or did I just describe to you what it is?
No and yes.
Yes. Well, the core elements, the core elements is an interesting conversation in the book. And we look at these things because of these 5 elements, risk, taxes, regulation, inflation, and depreciation of the dollar, you don't control hardly any of these. You might be able to control a little bit of the risk. But there are 3 questions that we have to ask the public. Which of these 5 elements do you want in your financial future? Which of these 5 elements do you control? So we have to ask the final question, why does traditional thinking and their solutions point you in a direction that you don't want and you don't control? We have to look at all of the elements that we don't see. And there's a nice conversation that I share with people all the time and it simply starts out by saying, what do you see? But more importantly, what don't you see? Most of life's accidents and unintended consequences are the results of things you don't see. And the barriers in your lives and your financial lives are knowing only what you know and seeing only what you see. So we have to slow the game down and we have to examine the things we don't see, because We can't go back to day one in their lives and start a brand new beginning, but we can change right now and help them create a brand new ending.
Yeah,
Right.
and Len, that's a great point that you made is, people not being aware and having the information that they don't know. And I mean, Tom and I talk about this all the time, right? Tommy, people think retirement and retirement planning is just, okay, now I'm not working anymore. Now I'm going to collect Social Security and all's fine. They don't understand all the hidden intricacies, the marginal tax traps, and all these other things that go into the retirement planning that, Tommy, I've spent the better half of a decade, Tom, 3 decades, same with you, Lynn, really discussing it. And I think now more than ever, we are really in an information war. People need to get the correct information because, a lot of what's being spewed out there by the network business TV stations or network news is not the correct information. It's dramatized and, in my opinion, fictitious news or fake news.
We have to get something very straight in our minds that their information is all in line to sell their products. It's about their
Right.
profitability, not yours.
Right.
And so we have to be aware of the elements that were going to impact us that they don't discuss with us. You're not going to find any of these hiddenomic elements represented on the financial illustration, the calculations, or the charts and the graphs. You're just not going to find them. And so if this is the hidden thing that's going to impact your life tremendously, there's 4 other hiddenomics that I'd like to share with you very quickly. And they are time, rates of return, the monetary unit, and accumulation. And these are the things that are very disturbing to me because if we take time times rate of return times monetary unit equals accumulation, this is the financial formula that the industry has used for 100 years. This is how they come up with their math. Now, we need to understand math. Math, when done properly, is always right. When it's done right. The problem occurs in the future that the math is right, but the elements 10 to 20 years from now around that math have changed dramatically. And we're not having this conversation. So we have to understand that the real, I think, change that we have to put into our training and our concepts is that buying power is more powerful than accumulation. Whatever they give me in a financial planning setup, I can't spend the accumulation number on that page. And what we have to understand is that accumulation is not something that you do in your everyday life. Where you live is in buying power. A quick example, if I may. If I had $300,000 in my 401k and someone told me I could get a 6.1% rate of return for the next 20 years, heck, I'd end up with $1 million. That sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then we start looking at the qualified plan as one of the most powerful things we can do for our financial futures. But the day I retire, there's a knock on my door, and there stands the tax guy. And the tax guy wants about 25% of my $1 million of accumulation, not buying power, accumulation. So now I really don't have $1 million. I got $750,000. And if we slow the game down enough to realize that at 3% inflation over 20 years, my buying power has diminished from $1 million of accumulation to $415,250 of buying power. That's not a 6.1% rate of return over 20 years. That's a 1.65% buying power rate of return.
And that's assuming no market risk.
You're absolutely right. From a different perspective, let's take a look at that example. At 6.1%, we started out with $300,000 and we ended up with $415,000 of buying power. Real math says that only takes 6 years in that calculation. So what this means is out of your 20-year plan, 7 years of your 20-year plan went to paying taxes, and another 7 years was eaten up by inflation. So only 6 of those 20 years really benefited you. And that's what we're facing in today's world. These are the things, that we have to discuss with the client. The role of the government comes into play because they're the ones, when we look at risk, taxes, regulation, inflation, and depreciation of the dollar, we have to ask ourselves the question, who controls these elements? Is it you? Is it the financial services industry? Or is it the federal government? And the answer is always the federal government. So we have to pay a lot of attention, and this is where the public loses track of what's really going on because they're not getting the right information. If you want me to, I can share some statistics with you that will start to paint a picture of where we're heading as a country. Is that all right?
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's important because, and you'd mentioned, who sets these standards, the government or the financial services. Heck, the government at the helms of whatever lobbyists are paying them, because as Tommy and I have talked about, people need to start looking, at both parties across the board that, hey, maybe our government's a little bit more self-serving than watching out for us, we the people. So statistics would be great.
And before you do that, just one other thought real quick. And this is something that I was taught from a mutual friend of mine and Len's, the late, great Nelson Nash. He always said, beware of the people who come up with a solution for the problem that they caused, right? So when the government is coming up with these ideas like IRAs and 401ks for the problem of wealth accumulation or retirement planning or legacy planning, that the problems that they created with those, and then they're giving us the solution for it. Well, that's what we have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Well, we have to understand too that in a qualified plan, the government is guaranteed their amount. The financial services industry is guaranteed their amount. What's the public guaranteed?
Nothing.
Right.
So we have to pay attention because in the book, the new book, Hiddenomics, and in Double Jeopardy, there's a little section called Washington is Broken. And this is something that we put out 10 years ago, but everything came true. But we must pay attention to the patterns and the direction that we're heading, because in the year 2000, the U.S. government debt was $5.67 trillion. In the year 2021, it hit $28 trillion. According to the U.S. Treasury, by the time the year 2026 comes along, we'll be at $47 trillion. That's the government's own source. We have to pay attention to the amount of money that they're spending. In the year, the federal budget set forward by the government in the year 2000 was $1.4 trillion. In 2020, the U.S. federal budget was $2.6 trillion, but they overspent it by $3.7 trillion. The new budget that they're pushing right now is $5.7 trillion. And remember, just 3 years ago, we were at $2.6 trillion. The one thing that really bothers me when we're doing the examinations of the economy is that the debt is going to increase over the next few years, by 60%. The number of new taxpayers entering age-wise and into the workforce is going to increase by 8%. There's something wrong here when the debt increases 60% and the number of new taxpayers increases only by 8%. What is that picture going to look like?
That's a big negative number.
Yeah, it is. In my question, I was speaking to a couple professionals yesterday, and I just asked them a simple question. Why does the government insist on increasing our taxes when they have no intent of ever paying off that debt?
Right.
In 2026, $47 trillion. And at what point in time do we understand that we're playing a very wicked game? Give you an example.
And this isn't a new problem. I mean, back in 2010, Robert Walker was
David
sounding,
Walker.
The alarm bells all over, right? 60 Minutes saying, listen, we have to double taxes right now when we're at 10 trillion then. And
I got to meet David Walker, and I got to meet Alan Greenspan, and it's a whole different game for them. But David Walker was a truth teller, and the government couldn't wait to get rid of him, and because he was just saying this isn't going to work. To give you an example of what's going on just recently, 80% of all the money in the circulation in the United States today was printed in the last 2 years. 80%. And our unfunded liabilities in the next 5 years goes from $159 trillion to $213 trillion. We have to pay attention to inflation because it is more dangerous than taxes. The May inflation rate was just released 3 days ago, is 8.6%. Now, that's a good way to look at inflation, is go to the government site and say, look at the CPI. But did you know there's 13 different CPI measurements? And they're going to pick the ones they want to use. The core CPI doesn't include food or energy. So that number is going to be a little bit smaller. But when we start using the regular CPI, it's simply an average of the average, 8.6%. But 60% of your money is going to elements like food and energy. Energy is up 48%, food's up 18%. And you must understand, another Hiddenomics element is that since prices are going up, the taxes on the buying and purchasing of those goods is also going up out of your pocket also. The number that we must pay attention to is the wholesale inflation number. In August of 2021, the wholesale inflation number was 8.3%. Today, it's at 10.8%. So you must pay attention between the difference between the public's 8.6% and the wholesalers' inflation rate at 10.8%, because the wholesale price is what's going to be passed on to the public in the next 30 to 90 days. So there's still room for this to get a little worse.
Now, Len, what would you mind explaining to our listeners what's included in the wholesaler inflation rate?
Well, they take a look at production costs, the elements. They use some of the basket of goods, what they used to use as a fixed basket of goods, to utilize their summaries. And it's getting the cost from the person who plants the seed into the ground to in the can at the grocery store. And it's the cost that's going up. There are some costs that we don't even think of, when we even talk about food, because the cost of fertilizing is almost doubled recently. But then everything moves by diesel. And I don't know what it is out in California, but diesel costs for a guy driving a truck to get our goods to the store has doubled in the last year and a half. These costs are passed on to us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was at we were at a restaurant couple of weeks ago, and right there on the bill, 4% inflation adjustment.
Yeah. And inflation is the thing that is going to kill you. I mean, when we look at inflation, the government keeps changing how they measure inflation. If we use the 1980 model, in today's world, inflation would be 16.9%. If we use their 1990 model, real inflation would be 11.4%, but they're still insisting that we're at 8.6%. The interesting thing because we get our news, financial news, in snippets of like 30 seconds. They talked about 2 days ago, they came out with the number 8.6% inflation over last year. Okay, but what if we took a look at 2 years ago? The wholesale inflation rate and the regular core inflation rate in May of 2020 was 0.1%. Now it's 8.6. And so in 2 years, just in 600 days, we have seen the inflation rate go from 0.1% to 8.6. That's, hundreds of percentage rates of return on inflation. And so we're watching that very carefully. And we have to, if you don't pay attention to this, you're going to get buried. And the same thing as home prices. You're out in La La Land. Well, you're south of La La Land, but in California, in San Diego, the average home price across the United States in the year 2000 was $165,000. The government is projecting the average price of a single home in 2026 will be $671,000. Now, wow. Let's put that into perspective for the average American, because in October of 2021, a $500,000 house would be about $2,100 a month. We go out 6 months later into 2022, March of 2022, that $2,100 doesn't buy you a $500,000 home anymore. It buys you a $395,000 house. 30 days later, with the increase in interest rates, at $2,100, you can afford a $370,000, not a $500,000 house. And this week, they're going to increase the interest rates. The feds are going to increase their interest rates by 0.75 of a point. So we're going to see 7 and 8% interest rates in mortgages on homes. And at 6%, you'll be able, $2,100, you'll be able to buy a $355,000 home, not a $500,000 house.
Yeah, and you mentioned just like the whole trickle down effect on that. I mean, you look at, okay, now house is $1.5 million. Well, now guess what's, being collected now? More property tax and just the cost of goods and services, right? We're paying a higher sales tax. But then if we're talking retirees, now your withdrawal rates are going up. You're taking out more money. Your IRA is being taxed more. It's just, the whole trickle down. And like you said, I mean, inflation, it is the most insidious tax because it erodes the purchasing power.
And it does it without people even looking or seeing it. That's, and so like you jump on there, John, with what you were saying, when people are taking more money out, especially in a market environment like we're in, now you're starting to deplete principal as opposed to just using income or dividends or interest, right? But with that depletion, you erode the ability for your portfolio to come back because you're eating away at so much of it. It's just speeding up that process of you running out of money.
Yeah. Or, a lot of people want to, I saw a retiree blog post or people, are we need to go to cash now. Well, if inflation's at double digits, your purchasing power is going to double digits too with you sitting in cash. So, that's a phenomenal point, with it being the trickle down effect, Len.
Well, we're looking at, you hit it on the nose, as the value of your house went up, so did the taxes, so did the insurance, so did the other, all the elements around that, upkeep, repairs, and things like that just skyrocketed. And so it's a domino effect. And now we have to start looking at how this is going to impact us in the future. Because the World Bank estimated that future retirement shortfalls, that's in IRAs and simple 401ks, will be between $6 and $14 trillion. This is on a personal level. And the World Bank also estimates that 51% of the people now working are expecting some type of inheritance to supplement their retirement for their incomes. 25% of that 51% of people are expecting that inheritance to be 100% of their retirement. And so you can hope and dream all you want, but if you're not going to ensure the value of your family right now, as the rich do in estate planning and things like that, they preserve the value of their livelihood by supplementing, some programs to pay off the taxes when, it's passed on to the next generation. But when we take a look at what the government told us, even just 5 years ago, this is interesting. This is from their own site. The government took in the year 2017, just 5 years ago, $1.9 trillion in income taxes. They estimated back then that in 2022, they would take in $2.7 trillion, which was a 50% increase over that 5-year period. The reality is, right now in 2022, we're at $3.8 trillion in income taxes. So they missed their estimates by almost 40%. And I'm just wondering what other estimates they are missing, because in the same study, they said in 2017, the debt in the United States was $20 trillion. And they estimated that at the end of 2022, the debt would be $23 trillion. And we're sitting at $30 trillion now and expected to go up to $47 trillion in the next 5 years. So these are the challenges that a planner, without this information, is simply doing guesswork. And I'm not degrading anybody. I'm not saying that, I'm just challenging the process in which we have been following all along. And we can't continue down the same path when things are turning over like they are right now.
I've been a student of Len's for probably about 10 years or so now, and I'm a member of his Wealth and Wisdom organization. And I've talked about on this show and with clients, I talk a lot about ensuring the legacy, like what Len just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And he's the one who taught me how to read the CBO chart that he just read off to you. We've talked in other podcasts, we've talked about not only what the government says they're collecting now, but I took it from 2021 out 5 years from now. And 5 years from now, in 2027, they're expecting to be collecting another 40% on top of the 50% from 2017. So, we're looking at 100 to 150% tax increase. And Len's just talking about income taxes. We're not talking about anything else. We're talking about personal income taxes. And as he mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, we are in a declining workforce. We have fewer and fewer people in the workforce. By 2027, the 90, I think roughly 90 to 95% of the baby boomers are going to be at 65. 65 is quote unquote the retirement years. So when we have a negative workforce, and we have taxes that are going to probably, by government accounts, only going up 40 or 50%, but in reality, it'll end up being probably 70 to 100%, right? One of the things that Len has drilled into me and the people that are part of Wealth and Wisdom, and one of the things that I try to drill into everybody on this podcast in client meetings, is we have to ensure, or we have to be responsible for that financial legacy, because no one else is going to do it for your families. Len, I'll let you expound on that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think people are looking for certainty. As I said in the very beginning, there's no financial certainty they can rely on. This is guesswork at this point in time. And then when we look at the core elements, we're saying who really controls this, and each one of those steps, risk, taxes, regulation, inflation, and depreciation of the dollar, is eating away at your ability to put, money away. One more example of this is in the book, there's a little section called Recalculating Miscalculations. And it's simply looking at putting $250 a month away into a qualified retirement plan. This is typical of what we get. And if you could get a 6% rate of return over 30 years, you know what, John, Tom, you'd end up with $250,000 30 years later. And then it goes on to say, well, we better start recalculating because we've got to take taxes out of this. So I retire 30 years later with my $250,000 accumulation, and the government wants 25% of that when I retire. So now my retirement account after taxes leaves me with $177,000. And then once again, we've got to start recalculating for inflation. Unfortunately, at 3% inflation over those 30 years, it's reduced my buying power to $77,247 from $177,000. So I have to ask the question, wait a minute, 30 years ago, I put in $90,000 of my money to end up with $77,000 of buying power. That's a negative 1.2% rate of return over 30 years. If I wanted to end up with $250,000 of buying power 30 years from now, my goal would be to accumulate, in accumulation, $806,000 to end up with $250,000 of buying power. We're not getting this information from the financial services industry. We need to be aware of what's going on, because without awareness, this is just guesswork.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And, and that's something that Tom and I, from the comprehensive standpoint, we tell people, listen, rates of return are nice. They're a little feel good. They also stress you out. But when you're really looking at comprehensive financial planning and proactive financial planning, it's really a small slice of the pizza, as we give Tommy the New York the New York pie reference, but we have to consider all these things. And I, Len, thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom and telling us about the 9 elements, because I really think it's imperative that people start to read past the headlines and dig deep into what has just become a government-made problem.
Unfortunately, the people that it is a man-made problem. Inflation is a man-made problem. Unfortunately, the same people who put us into the position of this problem are now they're going to tell us, how do we get out of it? How are they going to fix it? And I just don't trust their solution that will favor them more than it will favor us.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, they got rid of Robert Walker,
David
decade
Walker.
ago, or I'm sorry, David Walker.
Right.
Over a decade ago, when he was just saying, you just need to understand 4 simple little letters, MATH, math, and and you nailed it on the dot throughout your talk, that miscalculation after miscalculation, whether for whatever reason was done.
Yeah, the math is always right when it's done right, but the elements around the math over a period of time changes the results dramatically. And people don't get that in the illustrations, So,
No.
Well, that was, I mean, man, the time flew by. I don't know if it, flew by for you, Tommy, but that was a great interview, Len. We appreciate you coming on and letting people, it's not doom and gloom, but it's better not to have your head buried in the sand, right?
No,
I
it's
say
not.
something?
It's not doom or gloom. It's about understanding what's going on around you.
Right.
It's John, when you were a police officer, right? It was drilled into you, situational awareness.
Exactly.
Right, and the same in the military, situational awareness, and that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I think to answer the doom and gloom thing is knowing something can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing something can be disastrous.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you know the problem, you can start working towards a solution.
That's right.
And, you talk about the situational awareness. I mean, just the simple things that, I live in the suburbs and it's a safe community, but how many people just leave their garage doors open?
Yeah.
And as a former, police officer of 20 years, it drives me nuts.
Yeah. And as we said in the beginning, John, to master the financial solutions, you must first master the challenges that destroy the solution. And so what we're talking, and Tom hit it, want to talk about generational planning. I mean, I was able to, with my kids, sit down with them, and we created, they own it, but we've ensured my value. And when I decide to leave the planet, there's anywhere between 2.5 and $4 million for them tax free.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's their investment. My life expectancy in the United States is down, 5% over the last 3 years. Life expectancy for a male being born today is 77 years. So by the time we start collecting Social Security, it's a very short window. But I allowed my children to invest in me because there was a certainty there that I was aware of. Someday I'm going to leave the planet. And this was done out of love, not out of greed. And simply, they started putting, between the 4 families, they put in their share, and the $2.5 million is owned by them, which means now with my grandchildren, they have the ability to pay for education because they can use that $2.5 million because it is a certainty as leverage for things they want to do in their lives today.
Right.
I talk about that with folks too, Len, and I learned a lot of this from you. And one of the things that people have to understand is that, time is an asset, right? And like you said, we have to leverage it, and we have to. And
that's right.
The best leverage is the shortest amount of time.
Well, and that's the funny thing that we talk about the challenges, the industry, and listen to the words they use: money under management. the financial service industry wants to hold your money for the longest period of time. Now, there's a conflict here because my goals for my client is to achieve their goals in the least amount of time. Who's going to win this game? And if you start understanding leverage, there are many aspects of your financial life that have leverage you haven't even thought about. When we talk about moving the ball down to the next generation in the family, if my parents were alive, I would have invested in their livelihoods as much as I could. And I'm allowing my children to do that now, knowing that my value is high today, but 10 years from now, things diminish as you get older and they end up in a garage sale. That's where all your net worth ends up being if you don't plan properly.
Right on.
Yeah. Well, those are words to definitely end the show on. I mean, that was powerful. And Len, we thank you for all your knowledge. And before you leave, I want to tell everybody, if you get a chance, you need to go out, get Len's book, Double Jeopardy, Hiddenomics, and the Role of the Government. And Len, if our listeners want to read this book, where can they find it?
Well, they can find it on our site, Wealth and Wisdom Institute.com. Wealth
Awesome.
and Wisdom Institute. And better yet, they could contact you guys and you could ship it to them.
I was just going to say that. Why don't we buy a bundle of them, and then the folks can get in touch with us and we can get it out to them.
Yeah, sounds good. So just when you're listening, click on the contact links for Tom and I, and we'll get you a book free. So, well, again, that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thank you very much again, Len. It is awesome having you on. And Tommy, you have any last words you want to say?
I just want to thank Len for not only today, but for the years of friendship and the years of mentoring. I've seen Len almost annually up until the coronavirus hit. I would go to his programs, and there wasn't a time that even in our phone conversations, there isn't a time that I don't walk away having learned something great that I can use with my family, with my clients, with the general public on podcasts like this. So I have a profound thank you to you, Len, for everything
Tom,
that you've done for me.
Tom, you're a great practitioner. I envy your clients because you're on the right path. And I think this information that you guys are putting out is the center point of thinking and making good, sound financial decisions.
Well, that's what the Retire Happy podcast is all about. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. Until next time, let us help you make sound financial decisions. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
It's easy to get in touch with John and Thomas. If you're more on the West Coast, give John a call at 858-935-6210. That's 858-935-6210, or go online to GoSecurus.com. That's GoSecurus.com. If you're more of an East Coaster, then call Thomas, 973-394-0623. That's 973-394-0623, and online at internationalfinancial.com. That's internationalfinancial.com. And you can, of course, always just check the description or the show notes section of today's show for all that contact information. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps, and we'll see you next time on the Retire Happy Podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, LLC BCM, a registered investment advisor. BCM, Securus Financial, and International Financial Advisory Group are independent of each other. Insurance products and services are not offered through BCM, but are offered and sold through individually licensed and appointed agents. The opinions expressed by John Iamarino, Thomas O'Connell, and guests on this show are their own and are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot not be used as an indicator to determine future results. Any strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Before acting on any information mentioned, please consult with a qualified tax or investment advisor to determine if it is suitable for your specific situation. This program is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subjects covered.